Now I'm going to walk through this piece by Kathy J. Cohen called Punks, Bulldaggers, and Welfare Queens. So what's going on here? Well, we're looking at queer politics, but I'm going to focus particularly on her analysis of welfare queens, partly because this is what I do, but also because I think this is a less obvious example of who can or should be advocated for in queer politics, so I think it'll be useful for you. So she's looking at queer politics to see how we can construct a new transformative politics. This means she's trying to find a springboard for a movement that helps decenter heteronormativity. So this politics must consider the non-hetero, in the sense that it's marginalized, lives of punks, bulldaggers, and welfare queens, like you get in the title. So what is queer politics? Queer is a term that's been reclaimed by some non-hetero folks to identify outside of the already constructed labels. So it's a direct response to heteronormativity and a rejection of it. So queer theory and queer politics destabilizes the concepts of non-fluid sexualities and gender identities. So in theory, it can be used as an attempt to bring all the identities on the margins to a big group of self-proclaimed misfits. Since queer politics involves everyone outside of the center, this means that it must also deal with not only sexuality, but race, gender, and class. And this is because oppression is linked together in many ways. So all these sources of oppression work together to reinforce the center. However, Cohen thinks there's a problem in the way queer activism has gone historically. Because queer political strategies have often leaned towards the sort of us versus them or queer versus hetero mentality, meaning you're either queer or you're straight. This ignores the important contributions and sources of knowledge from other marginalized groups that aren't quote-unquote queer, but also aren't straight in the white middle-class hetero sense. Furthermore, queer political strategies have sometimes been overly exclusive. So, for example, some people who identify as heterosexual but lie outside of the center by not having nuclear families, not procreating in the quote-unquote right ways, etc., are still marginalized but are still left out of the movement. So we're going to get to an example of the welfare queens that Cohen discusses. This is an example of that. So how can heterosexuals be queer if they don't abide by the heteronormative standards, so to speak? So if you're not white, middle-class, heterosexual, and are or expect to be married and have children in your nuclear family, then you're not in the center. So it's really not just about sexuality. It's about maintaining the power of a very small group of people. So when we look at Reagan's welfare queen, we can see that he made this image of a single black woman who has tons of children so she can work the system. But really what's funny is that the demographic that commits the most welfare fraud? White men, right? So the image of the welfare queen is non-heteronormative because it was created to demonstrate that there may be some threat to white middle-class America. So here's an example then of how heteronormativity isn't just about sexuality. It's about making sure that the people in power stay in power. So the point? Queer politics needs to reconsider what it means to be queer. We need to focus more on the different intersections of oppression that work together to marginalize those who are non-heteronormative or are queer. So queer politics needs to work to bring everyone from the margins together and use our differences to benefit the movement. So it's about where we stand in relation to the man and how we can work together for transformation and liberation.